Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeff Baum. I'm the Assistant Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication, and I wanted to welcome you to today's event. Before I go any farther, I wanted to specifically thank Dean Rasmussen and Professor Cream Creighton at the Gould School of Law here at USC for hosting us today. So first, thank Professor Creighton and the law school, if you can. And the law schools and their first-rate staff, led by Marie Cleaves in the events department. The person that has made this possible for us today is our Knight Chair in Media and Religion, Professor Diane Winston. For those of you who have not met Professor Winston, she is a widely published and respected journalist. In fact, she spent many, many years reporting at the Baltimore Sun. She then pursued a specific interest in news, how the media covers religion and the coverage of religion, and authored a number of books, including one on the Salvation Army, and then went to the Pew Charitable Trust, where she led their programs researching the impact of religion in society and on the media. And we were able to snatch her away from there a couple of years ago when the Knight Foundation endowed a chair in media and religion at the University of Southern California. It was the first such chair at USC, and we were really delighted we were able to recruit somebody of Professor Winston's caliber to come to USC. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program, but please welcome Professor Diane Winston.
Which reminds us that life is short and then you die. But in between,
later than you think.
That it is. In between, you may have the dreams of Stringer Bell, you may know the demons of Jimmy McNulty, or you may know the honor code of Omar. And so with those poetic folks in mind, we turn to David, and we understand why critics have called The Wire the best thing on television, noting its attention to detail, its complex characters, and its Aristotelian sense of tragedy. Over the past 5 years, we've watched that tragedy unfold on Baltimore streets, its docks, its classrooms, its smoke-filled corridors, and now at its newspaper. In each venue, we've seen well-meaning people caught in a complex web of structural complaints over which they have no control. And we've had to ask ourselves, is this what happens to our dreams also? Is this what we're up against? How can we make a difference? This season's focus on journalism hits us close to home at the journalism school. But for anyone who lives in Los Angeles, it's a true story about the evisceration of our hometown newspaper. And it raises the questions about what journalists do when the news agenda goes awry. What is a newspaper's responsibility to the public? And how can we safeguard a profession critical to our democracy? I'm hoping that we begin here with these questions about journalism, and we also open it up to a wider discussion about what The Wire has looked at the last 5 years. Everything from education to the courts, to the docks, to the streets, to the cops. It's all up, and it's all good, and it's all important to hash out. Now, just a quick word about David. When I got to the Baltimore Sun in 1989, he was just finishing up the book that would become Homicide: Life in the Streets. He was an irresistible force. He was one of those young, old reporters who loved chasing cops and who liked nothing better than breaking news. I mean, he had a young body and an old soul. Okay? When Homicide became a bestseller, it changed everything and nothing. David remained at the paper, covering the same kinds of stories with the same intensity. He stayed at The Sun when Homicide became an award-winning television series, for which, as a writer, he won several awards, and he went on to complete a second book, The Corner, A Year in the Life of an Inner-City Neighborhood, which he became an HBO miniseries that he co-produced and wrote. David left The Sun in 1995, and that's important because even though he probably had a lot of opportunities not to be working at a daily paper, he did stay there quite a bit. And he went on to write for newspapers as well as for television. The Wire, which he developed, has won both the Edgar Award and the George Foster Peabody Award. And his next project, an HBO miniseries called Generation Kill, is in post-production. I am so thrilled to be able to welcome him here and to be able to introduce you to someone who I think is just an amazing talent on and off screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I'm not on? I'm on. They say I'm on. Do you want just go?
Just go.
Okay. The Wire is not mine alone. I have to say that right away. I have to say that first. It belongs to Ed Burns, who's a former homicide detective and a source. I guess I can say this now because we're both out of the business. He was one of my best sources on the police department. He was a homicide detective, and then later he became a school teacher in Baltimore City. After his retirement, we wrote The Corner together as an active narrative journalist. It also belongs. It's not on. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. You're reporting. Okay. Help. It's oh, damn.
It's a big change.
It also belongs to Bob Colesbury, who was a filmmaker who it was kind of a shotgun wedding at HBO. He was a feature guy who I did The Corner with, and I didn't trust him at first, but it was this shotgun wedding that HBO made. But I ended up just loving Bob, and we both worked on the visual template that would be The Wire together. And it belongs to Nina Noble, who made the thing run. So it did have, it had a lot of parents. And in subsequent years, it involved a lot of first-rate novelists, some of whom you're going to know, Richard Price, George Pelecanos, Dennis Lehane, people that I would have regarded it as improbable that they would have written TV until we were able to lure them in. And then it seemed like it was always the thing to do. So, there's enough in the 60 episodes of The Wire that if one person were to lay claim to it all, it would be embarrassing. And I don't want to do that tonight. I mean, I get to come here and talk to you guys, but it really was the result of a lot of, that's the thing about film, it's incredibly collaborative. I've just named the people who did a lot of the Uber planning, but it goes right down to all of the departments and wardrobe. I mean, film is, when you write something, it's on paper and that's it. I mean, maybe it goes to a copy editor, maybe your editor gives you some ideas, but the paper is the end. Prose writing is the end. Newspapering is the end. Comes off the press, that's it. We publish a script, and that's the end of the beginning. And what happens after that is all incredibly ornate and contextual between directors and writers and actors and department heads and everyone down to the teamster eating his donut. I mean, where he chooses to stand while he's eating his donut. And that's what film is. And that's actually wonderful in that, I've never worked as hard or as intensely with people as I have, with other people as I have on The Wire. I've worked as hard being a journalist. I've worked as hard writing books, but it's been much more intimate. And this collaboration has been, it's aggravating, it's infuriating, it's funny, it's epic. my closest relationships now center around the hours I spent arguing with the other writers or the actors or the directors. I feel like we've been through this 5-year war together, and you know, if I run into them on the street in New York or LA or anywhere, we just have to immediately go to lunch and start telling old stories. So that's the beauty of it. And everything I say, I wanted to make that the you know, preamble to. What is The Wire? It is a political tract masquerading as a cop show. It is an argument that our nation state is becoming less viable and will continue to become less viable. It's about the end of, I think it's one of the most affectionate and funny stories about the end of empire that you could compose, and I am proud that it is basically an argument that every day human beings matter less. All human beings. I mean, some of us may seem to matter more because we get paid more, or we succeed, or we catch a break, or individuals may matter more because it all is a big pyramid scheme, and some people are going to get lucky, and some people are going to think up a better mousetrap, and that's what capitalism is. But on the whole, human beings as a class are going to be worth less. We're already seeing it in our economy. Every time our economy shrugs, we lay off more people. We don't need as many people to run this economy, this service economy, as we did to run an industrial economy. We're going to need even less as automation and as computers do more work. This is not a new, this is nothing that I thought up. If you read William Junius Wilson, if you've been paying attention to anything, this is the 21st century, is where it is the triumph of capitalism, which is, when capitalism triumphs, labor is inherently worth less. When there's a dynamic between labor and capitalism, when capitalism is mitigated, when there's a social policy that prioritizes humanity as opposed to pure profit, there's some balance. America's been chasing that balance ever since the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. You can follow it all the way back to to Chicago and Haymarket. Even earlier, to the Wobblies. This battle has been going on for a while, but it would seem now that in this era of technology, in this era of where the world has gotten smaller and where labor can be utilized, in the Pacific Rim or in South America or anywhere else, and easily obtained for cheaper, it would seem that the battle has finally been won by capital. So if you're high on the pyramid scheme, if you're a little bit higher up, you're going to do a little better than the people below you. But it is a pyramid scheme. And that's what The Wire is about. Season after season after season. Whether you're a detective, whether you're a longshoreman, whether you're a newspaperman who knows his beat, whether you live in one of these neighborhoods and are looking for work, the game is now rigged. That doesn't mean that some people don't get to win. It's like a casino. You go in and some people get lucky. But the house odds are against you. And that's what the 21st century is, in my estimation. I'd like to say something happier, but that's just not my way. It's not there'll be no laugh track today unless you guys provide it. But having said that, I do think it's a very humanistic show. I think that it has a great deal of affection for its characters. I think it's aggressively interested in the characters, and I think we try to be as funny as we can, given the material. Because without the humor, it would be unbearable to watch. But that in no way mitigates the idea of tragedy. that is at the core of this thing. Who did we steal from? We stole from the Greeks. We stole from Aeschylus and Euripides and Sophocles, you know, the tragedians, not Aristophanes, not Funny Boy, but the other guys. And we stole early and often and continuously. For those of you who want to argue why Omar had to die or why Stringer had to die, you know, strap on a helmet, get in the game. You know, read Antigone, read Medea, read Oedipus Rex. You know, it had to happen. I mean, and the reason that we went back to that tradition is much of Western drama is really dominated by Shakespeare and post-Shakespeare. You know, everything from Chekhov to O'Neill to Ibsen. You know, all that good stuff. It's rooted in the individual's struggle against himself and his environment, and there is a presumption that starts to become apparent in Shakespeare's later plays. Not so, you know, there is a certain sense of fate in some of his plays, but in the ones that everyone, you know, takes great note of as having, you know, in that sort of arrogant phrase of Harold Bloom, the plays that supposedly invented human personality. They didn't invent human, but they invented the characterization of it. You know, Hamlet and Lear, and it is the individual struggling against himself or against his confines, and nothing is assured. You know, it's in what he does in the drama that will determine the outcome. Nothing is foreordained entirely, and that's why, and that's the part that speaks to us as moderns. Because, listen, we have a hard time with religion. Most of us. I mean, if you're fundamentalist, you don't. You know, you got a book and you follow it, and the rules are all written down for you. But if you're in the world and you're sort of thinking, you're thinking for yourself in terms of, you know, well, what do I think and how's this working and where's, you know, where, you know, no book is the answer just because it says it's the answer. You're evaluating stuff. We have a hard time placing the idea of ourselves beneath fate itself, beneath God. We want to believe that we're in control of our lives. You know, that if we eat the right things and, you know, cross at the crosswalk and you know, don't find ourselves in the middle of a war zone, and, you know, if we do all the right things and are good to the right people and take care of ourselves, a place will be made for us. And that's sort of the modern way of being. And you know, that's that great illusion of being in control, which as Americans we've, you know, never mind the country's manifest destiny, we all believe we all have manifest destiny for ourselves. And this notion of the Greeks where, you know, you're just walking down the street and some Olympian god hits you in the ass with a thunderbolt just because he doesn't like the way you look, or because it was your turn, or because, you know, the Oracle of Delphi said that you were going to die in a certain way and for a certain reason, and it's all foreordained. That kind of, you know, that the last people hang on to something like that were the Calvinists, and they didn't get very far with it. We rebel at that, but the truth is, I'm not sure that in this postmodern world of ours, that's not a more applicable political sentiment. So, we stole from the Greeks and we made the gods into institutions. That was the shtick, and you know, I'll be honest. We could have gone 5 years and nobody would have figured that out. But I gave a bunch of interviews after first season or before second season to, you know, just so people would start writing about the subtext of the show, because otherwise it was going to be a cop show and they were just going to write about it as a cop show. Once you start throwing around names like Euripides, you know. Euripides pants, you buy these pants. That's the Marx Brothers. You know, the other thing that I have to sort of honor right now is we stole a great deal of material from what I regard as the most relevant and important political film of the last century, and I think it's going to be applicable in spades right through this one, which is a 1961 film by Stanley Kubrick called Paths of Glory. Has anyone seen Paths of Glory? Yeah. Paths of Glory, to me, is the only important political film. Maybe like 10 Minutes of the Candidate with Robert Redford and Paths of Glory. That's it. As long as you understand Paths of Glory, you understand politics anywhere on the face of the earth. And you want to talk about, Paths of Glory is about the hell of middle management in an institution or in any culture. You're with Kirk Douglas. He is your point of view. He is an honorable colonel in the French army in one of the great anti-human disasters that sort of opened the century, which would be World War I. As inhumane a political endeavor has ever been conceived. And he is on the French front, and he is, his men make as gallant a charge against entrenched German positions as you can make. It displeases the ambitious generals, and they seek to, at random, pick 3 French soldiers to shoot at a firing squad to make an example to the entire division because they failed to take the German position. And he tries to defend these 3 soldiers. Its allegiance, even at that early point, even at that early moment in the Cold War, maybe not so early, but at that midpoint in the Cold War, was with middle management and with labor. It's with the soldiers and it's with the colonel that understands their humanity. It is not with Adolphe Menjou and Georges Macready, who are the great, obnoxious, ambitious French generals. If you go through every single season of The Wire, and before watching the season, you rewatch Paths of Glory, you'll be able to pick out, Rawls and Valchek, George Macready and Adolphe Menjou. Whiting and Klebanow, the editors, George Macready and Adolphe Menjou. It is, it's not that everybody is stock, but it is that everybody has the interests of the institution at that level. They do not have human interests. And that, politically, I just think that's the problem with this modern world and with this sort of money-obsessed oligarchy that we call the United States of America. And so that is the critique. And in between, some cool stuff happens, and people shoot this guy, and this car blows up, and you get to see some of the actors naked and some of the actresses naked, and they tell funny jokes, and this line is pretty, this line gets repeated. Everything else is flesh on the bones, but the skeleton is the Greek plays, and Greek plays thematically and filmically. It's Paths of Glory. I guess I want to go to, since we're doing this season, I guess we'll do a little about journalism. How many people here are journalism majors? Or communications majors, I should say. Wow. They're bailing out of the college as fast as they can. When you first enrolled, how many there were you? Several hundred? There? Yeah. Going over to the business school. How many? Yeah, well, how many are law students? Oh my God, I got to talk about the law? Bad, world full of lawyers. Well, I'd sort of planned to look at a few scenes about the journalism. So we couldn't possibly regroup now and do something different. So we'll just go through we'll motor through the journalism, and then if you have questions about law on the show, we'll do that. This first scene begins.
Offer buyouts first.
If they don't get enough of those, they'll go right to layoffs. Watch.
Fuck you care. You got all the seniority in the world.
Be ashamed if I have to get rid of all them 20-somethings in the newsroom.
Degenerate motherfucker.
Yeah. Clever sure do like to hire them sweet young things, don't you? 23, 4 years old, model thin, long straight hair, and big traffic light eyes.
And half of them can't write a lick, can they?
Yeah, our esteemed managing editor. Certainly does favor a certain type, don't he? Gentlemen, question mark. Someday, I want to find out what it feels like to work for a real newspaper.
What, cosa?
You start writing now, and I'm not here 10 o'clock tonight. Reworking your lead.
Reworking my lead.
Come on, Fletch, try to make the E-dot deadline for once in your life. Ain't mad for the council meeting?
Yeah. I'll top it with whatever smells fresh. Make the double dunk.
Yeah, they're gonna vote on a homeless ordinance, right?
Maybe not. Nerisse is making noises like she might throw it back to committee.
Yeah, well, find me some news somewhere.
Something's burning.
You wonder what it might be?
I'm not the police reporter.
What you call a twig, though, right? He sees a colonist. He's paid to sit on his ass. What's your excuse? Just left him in the smoking lounge, hit him on himself. What kind of people stand around watching a fire? Some shameful shit right here. Where else would you rather be, huh, kids?
Big guys.
Hey, Jay. The AP's got something on more cutbacks in city bus lines.
You don't say. Daily Record had it this morning. MTA trial balloon. State desk is covered.
Daily Record. All right, people, it's 2 o'clock. Any budget lines in case anybody's threatening to commit an act of daily journalism? City desk Ainsley. You didn't, huh? Well, what the fuck are we supposed to do for Centerpiece Art? Great, one for you. Photo didn't get art for the racetrack piece.
What about art for the Hopkins press conference? Can we get that?
Scratched it for racetrack. Hey, Swag, it's me. If something's on fire, I'll bring this ball in. Surprise me with a nice, pretty picture, huh?
Look,
Okay.
what we have is drug violence, and plenty of it. What you have are federal gun statutes that come...
So, I thought that scene went on, but actually it was broken up. This was the first time we were introduced to this new, having beaten up on various other worlds, we now turned our attention to the Baltimore Sun, my alma mater, Diane's alma mater, which is an institution I actually, although you would think not, I actually love it. And I'm heartbroken over what's happened. When I was there, when I first got there, there were 500 reporters, an evening edition, zoned editions. They were, and at some point, they had all those reporters to chase out the competition. They killed off the Hearst paper, the afternoon paper, then closed the Evening Sun, having used it to kill off the Hearst paper. They had zoned editions in all the counties with separate staffs, which they were trying to kill out the little county papers and take their ad base. When they failed to do that, they bought the county papers, as many of them as they could. And once they had a monopoly, they knocked it down to 400 people while I was there. I was one of the people who left on the way to it becoming 400. Now it's 300. We were owned by the LA Times when they took it from 5 to 4. And then the Times was bought out by the Chicago Tribune, the devil itself, when we were at about the time that I decided to leave. And now it's now under 300. So the title of this first episode was More with Less, which is the mantra that you keep hearing as our press is eviscerated. Pardon? Oh, you have it locked up? Let me see it. I'm not sure we're at the right place. But let's see what happens. So I'd rather talk about it all together.
Gutierrez! Gutierrez! Get your ass over here.
Yeah,
You say that 120 people were evacuated.
yeah, they were.
You can't evacuate people. I mean, you can if you want, but that's not what you want to say.
The building can be evacuated. To evacuate a person is to give that person an enema. The details, Mr. Dieros. Baltimore Sun, God still resides in the details.
You teach it right.
What are we going to do with these children today?
Fucking fuck. What a burnt dog.
Carlisle again.
Hey, Swag, I'm looking at fire right from East Baltimore, and I got a burnt Barbie in the foreground. Yeah, and I might actually believe you if it wasn't Carlisle who took the shot. No fucking way I believe in this picture. Maybe something else. Every fire photo he brings in, there's got to be some burnt doll somewhere in the debris. That cheap motherfucking guy with his fucking hair and the dolls throwing light photo on each one. You check his fucking trunk in front of the whole collection. What's your legal?
Council delays vote on the homeless initiative at Carcetti's behest. He doesn't want it to look like the city's running the homeless out of downtown, so he asked Maurice to redraft the measure.
That's right. You don't evacuate people.
What?
Never mind.
Working anything good?
Just what day cops missed, a fatal in Charles County and a gas leak downtown.
Breeze, huh?
Quiet day so far.
It's a shit news town.
You think?
How many stories go national out of here? Not many.
Those bodies in the houses last year, that got a lot of play.
And they didn't even solve it, right? Story had no legs at all. Since then, what else?
Jeff! Jeff!
What?
Come here. Jesus Christ.
What now?
You stay for the zoning deals?
No, I came back here to write.
You check the fucking library. You should check clips too. It goes backwards. No, check that. You go back to the hall, you get the vote on this thing. Find out who sponsored this. Find out whether Carcetti or Nerissa or whoever's behind it. You buttonhole them, find out what the hell's going on.
Why? Who's Ricardo Hendricks?
The drug dealer. Fat-faced rape.
Scott.
This property on Baltimore Street is a titty bar the city wants for the Howard Street Enterprise Zone. But this other property they want to trade with them? I want to find out what that's all about.
This is a drug dealer they're trading properties with.
Yeah, he's got a record as long as you're on. A couple of convictions too. Go, get some good quote. I want you to go to this address. It's a strip club called Desperados. You ask around for the owner. His name's Ricardo Hendricks. You tell them, until we get a comment, we're going to put Ricky's picture on the front page every day.
Who is he?
He's a drug dealer. But from the look of this, he runs some sort of game at City Hall. We want to comment as to why he's trading property with the city and what he stands to make off the deal.
Okay.
What do you want from me? Pull clips, check the morgue files, write the game matter on Ricardo's history.
Well, he goes to strip clubs and I'm pulling clips in the morgue?
You guys late for the council meeting? Looking for you, sir. Me, I'm racing. I'm late for some...
All right, so in those two scenes, I basically stated, without stating them, I hope, all the themes of the coming season, which is it's wrong to cheat in journalism, which you would think would be the kind of thing that doesn't need to be stated in these modern times of ours. But in fact, the last poll I saw, 60% of Americans believe that reporters routinely make it up or make things up. I mean, I don't believe they routinely make it up, but I do believe there are reporters who make it up. But that's an incredible number, 60%. So yeah, in this way, in this very light and playful way, it's a photographer who's dropping a little burnt doll in the foreground of his shots, which, by the way, there was a guy at the Sun who did that. Every single line of dialogue is stolen from the Baltimore Sun. You know, it's like we didn't, you know, I'd like to say that we're really creative, but in truth, it all happened. The other thing is out-of-town ownership, this sort of carpetbagging of reporters and editors into an institution like the Baltimore Sun or the LA Times. Cities are distinct. They have histories. They have residents who have histories. They have neighborhoods that have histories. What makes a newspaper great is some organic connection to that. When newspapers are owned by chains that exist with only a fealty to the price per share and to their stockholders, they exist a little less in terms of the cities where they actually, the cities that they're actually obliged to cover. And from the time I was there, the Baltimore Sun went from being, a stodgy, gray lady, but nonetheless a paper trying to get it right and very idiosyncratic to Baltimore, to being a flashier, more dynamic paper that knew less of its city than ever before, to the point where now the average reporter is in his 20s, not his 30s or her 30s, and knows very little about the city. And I read it sometimes in wonder at some of the stuff that appears in it, because nobody has any sense of the history of my city. These, they may be here today. They were in Orlando tomorrow. If they get promoted, they might be in Chicago next. It isn't new. It is in no way connected to the city, which brings us to the first, I thought, rather obvious metaphor, but I couldn't help myself, of, who stands around when something's on fire? Well, journalism's burning. I mean, it's burning to the ground. It's going down to the waterline. In this sense, if you think the internet is going to replace journalism, and by the way, I'm not talking about newsprint, because newspapers are an anachronism, and the idea that you're going to get a piece of a tree delivered to your door every morning, yeah, that is absurd in this day and age. Everything's got to go online. But if you think that instead of organized news gathering organizations with the depth and range of newspapers are going to be supplanted by blogging and by the internet, here's what the internet is. And there was some critique about the Wire. Why aren't they showing the internet? Why aren't they showing the internet's impact on journalism this season? Well, we did. The internet's impact on journalism was, I think it was about episode 2 or 3, I can't remember now. The editor stands up, he says, we're closing all our, we're losing money, the ad base is down, we're closing all our foreign bureaus, we have another round of buyouts, and, it's a hard time for newspapers. The internet has become this free source of commentary, and he acknowledges the economic preamble, which is the internet. But if you think that the internet is journalism, I don't know what to do with you wrong-headed and tragic generation. I don't know what to do. Stay in school, learn more. I don't know what to say. I have never run into an internet reporter at a city council meeting or a zoning hearing, and I've never heard of one in Fallujah. And I've never, you want the Wire scene that would have included the internet in season 5? Here it would have been interior living room, garden, apartment, male, 30s, sits at computer. Links to Baltimore Sun article, shirt off, underwear, he scratches his left testicle until satisfied, begins commenting on article. That is the internet. That is 90% of the internet. That's not to say it's not entertaining or that it's not creaming a lot of the froth off of the first generation news coverage. And that there aren't a lot of interesting commentators, and that some people don't have a legitimate voice, and that it's not a democratization of opinion. It is all those things. And I would not want to live without it, and I'm glad it's here, and it can only lead to some good things. But the one tragic thing it is leading to is the destruction of the first generation news organizations, the ones that have or used to have the money to send people to London, to Fallujah, to Moscow, to the zoning board, to the school board hearing, to the courthouse. That newspaper is disappearing before my eyes in my city and in most second-tier cities. And that's what the season is depicting. So in the end, what we did was we had, for those of you that watched The Wire this season, let's go Socratic. Let's go that way. Let's get you involved. What do you think happened? What was the main story that happened? No, it's not the main. What was the main theme of the media story? Yes. Well, that was part of it. That was sort of true for all of it because, of course, we had the McNulty scam going on. But just in the newspaper story alone. In the newspaper story alone, what what thematically happened? What was the most important thing that happened at the Baltimore Sun? What was the most important thing depicted that happened in season 5?
Was it that they were chasing after the Pulitzer Prizes? They were going after the prizes instead of...
Well, they were doing that. That was
more-
part of it. That was part of it. But no, that's not. I mean, that led to the theme. That's one of the ingredients. Yeah.
I feel like in a lot of ways it was ambition over substance, both between the reporters and between the ambition to get more ad money or to do more with less. It's trying to make more money for the newspaper.
No, the people in the newsroom don't care about the money. They want the money to be there so they don't have more cutbacks. But I never cared about advertising. I don't know any reporter that does.
They lost their legitimate means of pursuing the prize and the story, so they turned to, via Scott, illegitimate means, and therefore became corrupt.
There was a fabricator, right. That was the big thing that everyone noticed. This guy's lying, right?
Yeah. The whole system became corrupt, just like the drug world and any other world. When the legitimate means of pursuing goals aren't available, you turn to illegitimate means.
Well, but that guy was operating on his own. He was a free agent. That wasn't an institutional prerogative. I admit, that was the overt story. That was the overt story that we used to connect the newspaper to the police tale, to the narrative. But
they lost the pillars of the journalism group right within the newspaper.
Right. And what was the result of that? You're dead on it. You're dead on it. Keep going. And what happens when that happens?
Well, I mean, you lose the history that you're talking about of your city, the people who would cover
Absolutely.
the city, the people who understood journalism and what made great journalism and how to nail the story.
Right.
And
so what happens?
The newspaper begins to unravel.
What happens when a newspaper unravels? You're almost there. Oh, take it home. Take it home. What happens when a newspaper, what's the difference between an unraveled newspaper and a raveled newspaper?
Democracy dies.
Well, I happen to agree with you, but it gets it wrong?
You can't find the story.
Bingo! Who said that? Yeah, that's it. The Wire, the whole season of The Wire was about what didn't happen. And this is why I am the king of meta. This is why I am. Now you've got me excited. This is the great joke that we played on the newspapers this year. And I said to myself, when we worked on the story, I said, you know what? They're going to be angry at us. Not everybody. I mean, believe me, I got an inbox full of correspondence, emails from smart reporters who got it. But there were a lot of people who looked at the guy making the stories up, or the editors who were Pulitzer hungry, or the this or that, or the way this was portrayed, and they're arguing with what's happening. And people watch and read stories. People consume stories on one level for the most part. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. The guts of what happens in The Wire in season 5 is what doesn't happen. In season 5, a guy who wants to be governor cooks the stats, who ran as a reformer, who was against the guy who he challenged, the incumbent he challenged, because the guy was cooking the stats and cheating and wasn't addressing the crime problem, ends up going all the way around the bend until he's cooking the stats. And it never makes the newspaper. You never see them get a handle on it. We know that they hype the third grade test scores from season 4, and that he's continuing to hype the third grade test scores to make No Child Left Behind look like it's working, when in fact they can't even sustain the third grade test scores into 5th grade, much less beyond that. It's never in the newspaper. Their attempt to write an education series falls by the wayside when they see more juice in writing about the homeless. We ultimately understand that there are political prosecutions, Clay Davis and stuff, that happen that are undercut because of the conflicting ambitions of the political players, be it the U.S. attorney or the state's attorney, and everybody's looking to the next chair. And so the ability to actually get Clay Davis falls apart in a series of backroom maneuvers. None of the backroom maneuvers are ever reported in the paper. we see the biggest drug dealer in town, Prop Joe, the guy who has the connection to the out of town, the good dope, he's killed. It's a brief on B3 that says, you know, that most likely when it was written says, secondhand store owner shot to death in house, police have no suspects. Omar gets killed. Now, admittedly, you need a pretty good police reporter to know who Omar is. But that ain't going to happen because Twig took the buyout in episode 4. So he's gone. So it's, you know, Alma's a good reporter. Maybe one day she'll be, but right now she's in her 20s. She's been in town maybe a year or two. She ain't going to know who Omar is. All along, we put stuff in almost every episode that said, anything you know about the world of Baltimore that we've portrayed, and by the way, you knew a lot if you were viewers because you've been watching it for 50 some odd episodes, anything that you know to be nuanced and subtle and the real story will somehow not find a way to get into the newspaper. That was the story of The Wire. That was, yes, there was a guy making it up. That's an aberration. It's a fun aberration. By the way, it happens a lot. I mean, but the vast majority of reporters do not make stuff up, and they would be appalled. You know, they are like my friend Steve Gorman, who I went to college, my college roommate, he's sitting right there, who, when I remember the morning when he knew he screwed up the dorm fee hike. He had the percentages wrong, and there was a scream from the shower as he realized he did it was the funniest thing you'd ever heard. Do you remember? Am I lying? No. He came out, wrapped in a towel, saying, "I fucked up the dorm fee hike. I can't believe I did that. I have to call the president of the university and apologize." Or the chancellor. I remember that. That is the essence of most reporters. Poverty Reporter was great. I love that. They replaced the poverty beat with something they called the non-profits beat. You know the difference between a poverty beat and a non-profits beat? Poverty beat covers poor people of color. Non-profit beat covers the rich white people you invite to your cocktail parties and tell you about the good works they're doing, and you cover their good works. And that's what happened at the ball. You know, in a city that was 47% of the African American males were without work, where neighborhoods were being decimated by drugs, where the unions had been busted in strike after strike. No labor reporter, no poverty reporter, no courthouse reporter. We had a nonprofit reporter. That was what happened to my newspaper. And the part that I loved, I just love the meta of it, which is, here's the critique, and there isn't anyone commenting on the critique. Because on some level, they just don't care. You know, whatever it was that newspapers once did is gone. At the best newspapers, there are shards of it that remain. But even that, you know, the Times is about to lose 100 jobs. The LA Times, this is a horror show. Jefferson said, it's a famous quote, you know, he'd rather have a country with newspapers and no government than a country with government and no newspapers. Well, the Jeffersonian nightmare is coming true in our lifetime. We're on the way to that. And that's what The Wire is about. And the funny part of this season is watching everybody debate whether or not Alma should have said this, or should have done that, or should have driven here, or whether or not Klebanow is based on Bill Marimow, who was this guy. It's so funny to watch, because ultimately, they are heading down this path of extinction. I mean, I'm with Molly Ivins on this, the great Molly Ivins, when she says it seems that newspapers' only response to this technological tidal wave of the internet is to commit suicide. And they're doing it slowly, but they're complaining like a bunch of cats in the alley while they do, and not doing much to aggressively stop. So that was the critique. And it's the last piece that we wanted to put into The Wire after 5 seasons, because ultimately all those other attendant problems, unless they're recognized, unless they're talked about, unless they become the currency of debate, nothing's going to change in places like Baltimore, or East St. Louis, or East LA, or South Chicago, or North Philadelphia. The other America will keep being the other America. Except now they won't have a TV show, because Wire's done. So that's my happy news. And now, I think I'll just throw it open, and anybody wants to talk about the show in general or about the law in the show.
In order to take as many questions as possible, we're going to ask folks to line up in the aisle so we can go one right after the other. We've got about 20 minutes or so for questions.
Go ahead, shoot.
Do you want to tell us who you are or where you're from? Or
you can do it anonymously.
No.
Yeah. Well, they can always lie.
Yes.
All right, for you, it is on. Good. And I'm interested to know what the solution is, if there is a solution, to cutbacks and to throwing jobs out the door when people aren't buying newspapers in the numbers that they were buying newspapers.
Right. I'll tell you what I think the solution is, and the horror is I don't think they're going to get to it. I think it's too late. But the solution is and was, you have to charge. Any business major will tell you. Do we have any business majors here? No. See, it's talk about marginalizing yourselves. Any business, if you have a product and you can't charge anybody for it, you don't have a product. And ultimately, newspapers didn't make any money on circulation. In fact, they lost money a little bit, some of them, just because of the cost of delivery. But what circulation gave newspapers was the ability to go to an advertiser and say, I got 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 people willing to pay for this every day. Pay money for it. Paid circulation. That's why they measure it as paid circulation. Online hits mean nothing. We all know from surfing how fast and inconsequential an online hit is, and how fast you move when you're. There's online advertising is never going to, for unpaid websites is never going to create the same kind of revenue as display advertising in a newspaper. You've already lost the classifieds to Craigslist. There's already a lot of problems. But what has to happen, and what had to happen early on, was that the preeminent newspapers in the country, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, the three best newspapers in the country, had to say, we're charging. We're not going to charge you as much if you want to take the paper online. We'll charge you half as much to take the paper online as to have taken it delivered to your doorstep. But we're going to charge it. So if it's $30 a month to get it to your doorstep, it's $15 to get it online. And they had to make their online services as usable and viable as anything else they did. And in doing so, they would have set the trend for other secondary regional newspapers like the Sun or the Miami Herald or the Philadelphia Inquirer or the San Diego paper or San Francisco Chronicle, and allowed them to do the same thing. And this would have generated enough revenue, not just from the websites, never mind the websites, it would have generated enough credibility among online advertisers to maintain the revenue flow that would maintain quality news gathering. And instead, everybody mistook the internet for advertising for their product when in fact it was their product, and they gave it away. That stuff can leak, that people can link to stuff, that stuff would get out, of course. Everybody's fighting a rearguard action, everything, the music industry, the publishing industry. But you know what, when Google started to try to publish books on the internet, the publishing industry said, no, we're going to sue the shit out of you. And when Napster was going to download all the music, no, we're going to sue the shit out of you. And it is a rearguard action, but unless you can charge for your product, you can't generate the revenue to continue to achieve your product. And that had to happen. And as long as the New York Times and the Washington Post, which have more resources than these other second-tier paper, as long as they're willing to take the hit, and they are taking a hit, their margins are going down. They're not making money. They're attriting out talent from their newsrooms, but they're still very fat. Well, the Baltimore Sun, when the New York Times goes from 1,200 reporters to 1,050 or 1,050, what's the percentage loss? It's significant. But when the Baltimore Sun goes from 500 to 300, you know, their margins are a lot worse. And the reflection on the quality of the Baltimore Sun is dramatic. Same as the Minneapolis paper. And so these communities that rely on newspapers for their fundamental news gathering are looking at an abyss. And I don't know if we can get, you know, now that the internet has been free for so long, I don't know that we can get back there. You know, it's going to take, and by the way, it's not as if the New York Times is going to do it if the Washington Post doesn't, because they'll get killed. You know, everybody's got to take a deep breath and do the same thing. The problem with that is there's a name for it. It's called antitrust. They can't even have a conversation, right? Here's where the lawyers jump in and they're nodding their heads. Oh yeah, it's an antitrust problem.
But in an industry where the whole ethic is to get information out, I mean, to tell people what's going on, to tell people your government is ripping you off or something.
It's not PBS. Newspapers have always been for profit. But newspapers have always been for profit. They've always been for profit, and I don't think that's going to change.
But
I mean,
it's not an intellectual
what?
property the way, like Napster or something like that. If you have a song.
If it's not intellectual property, then why do journalists keep getting fired for plagiarism? You
They
know?
don't own the story. They own their presentation of the story.
Well, again, then they own their presentation. If you want to own the story, you send 2 reporters and a photographer to Fallujah. You spend the money to do that. If you, Mr. or Mrs. Blogger, decide you want to own the story about what happened in Fallujah yesterday, you pay to send somebody there. Short of that, you know, I mean, there has to be listen, I don't think it can happen anymore. But absent it happening, this is a race to the bottom now. And it's going to be an interesting little democracy we're going to be pretending to when nobody's really covering anything. And the last handful of reporters are, you know, chasing down some 5-part project that nobody gives a fuck about so they can win a Pulitzer, so that they, you know, because everybody needs to get to the New York Times, to whatever the last big pond is where fish can still swim around. You know, I better win something quick. I mean, you know, God help us.
But where are the readers going then? I mean, if readers aren't buying the paper, do you think readers aren't buying papers because, you know, is it the
Young readers don't buy newspapers. They read online. Right. I got a 13-year-old kid. He reads online, but he reads the Washington Post online for free. You know, now, I mean, I think that, you know, that's just anecdotal, but I think it's quite obvious from all the news. Everything I've read on Romanesco is people under 35, you know, don't buy newspapers the way people over 35 do. They read online. Well, newspapers are going to have to control that product, and they're going to need to achieve a financial victory for controlling that product, or they are not in business, or there is no business. I mean, the presumption is we're going to keep diving until finally online advertising catches up with what we're losing in the print edition. But online advertising is never going to pay the kind of rates if it's just a matter of you going to them and saying, "Hey, we had 200,000 hits on our site last week. What's a hit?" You know, somebody want to pay $10 for that? Oh, well, okay. You have a reader then. You have a hit. What, you know? That's the problem.
Hi, Dave. Delaney Dragon. I'm a filmmaker, and my question is along the lines of filmmaking and looking at what you've accomplished in the last several years on television. I'd certainly put that filmmaking up against the filmmaking of filmmakers as opposed to people doing television, if that makes a difference to you at all. But
there was an insult in there somewhere, but just keep going.
No, not at all. It's
okay. You didn't mean it.
You're the only filmmaker in television that I think a lot of people would put, you know, in that realm with the great filmmakers that are working.
It's all good.
They're all. So, putting you kind of in that group, I'm curious about your development as a filmmaker. It seems like you've spent, you know, most of your life not as a filmmaker,
Right.
whereas most people who are filmmakers spent most of their life making
I was on the
films.
I was on the set of Homicide for a year and a half. Not every day, but like I would go down for certain episodes where I was on. Before I realized that the guy standing over the camera doing this was focusing it. That's how little I understand about filmmaking, or did. I still can't tell one lens from another. But I did learn shot composition. I learned a lot from Bob Colesbury. And I learned a lot from Tom Fontana. And I learned a lot from other people because it was fun to learn new stuff. But a lot of doing this collaborative thing is knowing how much you don't know, and allowing within certain frameworks, allowing directors and directors of photography and gaffers to do their jobs. Is to explain what you generally want, what you're trying to go for, and then letting them do what they. I mean, my first responsibility is story, and after that, my second responsibility is to surround myself with people who know what I don't know.
Would you say that the filmmaking within The Wire is really your vision, or would you really credit that filmmaking? By that I mean decisions, for example, not to use mood music, the lighting.
That's my decision. Yeah, I always hated score. I hated score.
Those are very strong filmmaking tastes, in my opinion, and style and
they're
vision.
sort of rooted, but they're sort of rooted in. If I was, one of the things that I've done is I've sort of co-opted a lot of journalistic logic. I mean, the journalism of film is documentary, in a way. And I've co-opted, you don't score a lot of documentary, at least the rigorous documentarians don't. And so, did I watch a lot of Frederick Wiseman when I was a journalist? Yeah, I did. Documentarians are interesting to me. But it's not a documentary. I'm using some techniques, but it's basically a television drama. A lot of stuff, the palette, the manner in which the camera moved, had more to do with our first DP and with Bob Colesbury than it did with me. The one thing that I brought to the table with that was I never wanted to see the camera fish. You know what fishing is, right, if you're a filmmaker. But I never wanted to see, for those of you that are not into filmmaking, there was all this bouncing around, NYPD Blue, homicide, jump cut. I never wanted to see the camera know more than it ought to know. The camera could be a smart person. It didn't have to be stupid. But it couldn't know more than the camera should know. And I didn't know what the rule was until I used to just know when I didn't like the camera move for like the first season, 2 seasons. And I would say something to Bob, and Bob would translate my fucked up way of explaining it. No, it sucked because it was like it made the punchline lame by going. But then after Bob died, and Bob died after season 2, and I was on the first episode of season 3, and there was this one long shot where Uda, the DP, was shooting these cops, and they're like making a game plan in the dirt, like with a stick, like you did in a football, and they're like all squatting, and Herc was standing up here, and Herc had a funny line, and when it came time for Herc's funny line, she panned up for it, and she got there in time for the line. She wasn't late on it; she was right on it. Like, here we go, here's Herc's line. He says his line, then we go back down, and right away, I did the equivalent of yelling "cut." I was like, "Wait, no, wrong." And right at that moment, I realized something about film and about this kind of storytelling, which was, how'd the camera know that Herc was about to be funny? It can't. And, at the moment that the camera chased and caught the line, the camera revealed itself. The artifice of film revealed itself. And so then I finally had a rule. I was like, the camera can only know what it can know. I don't care if it's late on the line. I let him say the line and let the camera go up for the moment afterwards. Or cut to it in coverage, but don't give me a camera move. And it's a very simple thing, but at that point I realized, okay, I know what I don't want to do. And so that was, I guess all I'm saying is that you learn certain things, but, crossing the line and other.
Yeah, thank you.
The director comes to me and says, I'm going to shoot this long lens. I'm like, knock yourself out. What's a long lens?
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Laura Weber. I'm a journalism major. I know, dying breed. As a nosy journalist, I have to ask a question that's been haunting my peer and I.
Peer?
Right over here, he's also a journalism major.
Oh, that's right. You were the two.
And we have the two of us, intense philosophical conversations, and we need to know, are Randy and Cheese Wagstaff related?
They are. I can say officially that that is his son.
It is his son?
It is his son.
Why is that a storyline that you didn't pursue at all?
We were going to pursue it.
You just blew my mind, by the way.
listen, there were a lot of latent things buried in the wire because you never know. We buried certain things. We buried certain things as potential storylines. Not all of them turned out to be appropriate, but ultimately there was a moment where if we wouldn't have changed anything in the main storylines of season 5 if we were given, we were given 10.5 hours. If we were given 12 hours, the main storylines would have stayed exactly as they were, but there would have been a little thing with Cheese and some disconnect between. It wasn't like he was going to adopt them or anything, but there was been a little disconnect there. There would have been a Cuddy storyline, little minor storylines. That's where the extra hour and a half, or probably And by the way, if we thought it would have really aggressively added to the picture, I could have gone back and said to HBO, I need 11 hours, I need 12. At the point at which we were in production, Carolyn Strauss would have granted it. It was I went back to her. I said, I can't finish number 10 in 60. I need 90 minutes, and she said, no problem. So ultimately, it wasn't as if evil HBO was stomping all over the wire and not giving us what we needed. We were achieving the storyline we wanted to do. Everything else would have been a little more icing on the cake, and one of the little pieces of icing would have been a little with Randy and Cheese. But at some point, you start realizing the skeleton is stronger for not having so much flesh on it.
Yeah.
And so the writers really looked at it and said, you know what, it's just gilding Lily. We got everything we need out of Randy from this scene with Bunk. There's nothing more we could say by utilizing that storyline. So you ultimately make these choices. That doesn't mean you don't protect yourself by burying stuff in earlier seasons.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was a journalism major, and I wrote for a small paper in Indiana. We covered everything from school boards to Board of Zoning Appeals to police. And we were pretty robust in our coverage, and we had a lot of reader feedback because it was such a small, little county with like a 50,000 circulation.
Right.
Do you think a lot of it has to do with a lot of problems with journalism now in the big city is that the population is just too fragmented? You said your son reads the Washington Post, but I don't know if you live in Washington, D.C. Is it a matter of you can get the big picture online from other sources, and if you lived in a small town, you're going to pay attention to the civic affairs because it more closely relates to you?
Well, I get the New York Times at home now. It's delivered to my doorstep. That wasn't possible 15 years ago. When I started in journalism, we used to send somebody down to Washington, or we used to call up the AP as quickly as we could and say, send carbons of what the Post has or the Times has. It was a big deal to actually see a physical paper, unless it was hours late or days late. And then you'd see him at certain boxes, and then all of a sudden one day, the guy who was delivering you the Baltimore Sun said, "Oh, do you want to take the Post or the?" He was delivering all three. And I live in the heart of Baltimore, so one of the things that's happening is we're creating these national papers, the Post and the Times, and one of the reasons they may not ever want to charge for the internet is that they're basically where it's eroding are in the regional papers. There may come a point at which you may start seeing some big city dailies go under, and then you'll see the New York Times and the Washington Post pick up circulation from them. Just like the Manchester Guardian in England used to be for Manchester and for the north of England. And then one day it wasn't the Manchester Guardian anymore, it was the Guardian. And it was countrywide. Obviously a lot easier to do in a 40 million population country that's as small as England. But the same dynamic applies. And I think in some ways, the worst of all worlds is to be a regional paper. The one thing that the Baltimore Sun has right now that is precious is it has the Baltimore area. If I want to know what's happening in my city, I still need to look at the metro section of the Sun. What's horrible is I look at the metro section of the Sun and I still got no clue. It's not in there. I didn't mention the other part of the. You know what? I ruined it. I was telling you all about my meta moment, and I ruined it. So let me interpose here. Here's the joke of the meta moment at the Baltimore Sun, which is all these things happened in The Wire, right, where they missed all these stories. Remember I was talking about that? And actually, because I do admire good journalism, and because I didn't want to be, sort of rigorously totalitarian about my critique. The Wire begins with, as you saw, a city editor, organic to his city, somebody who came up in the ranks in Baltimore, seeing a guy, a drug dealer, recognizing it by name, and doing a very good act of adversarial journalism. He catches the city council president in an ugly quid pro quo. So it begins with a good act of journalism, and just to steal a little something from the end, it ends with a good act of journalism, of narrative journalism. In between, though, yeah, they miss every story. But here was the meta part. This is the part I ruined when I was telling the story. In reality, the Baltimore Sun missed and never reported on the fact that Martin O'Malley, when he was running for governor for 3 years, consistently had his police commanders hide the stats, reduce crime, cheat the crime. The commander of the Southwest District made robberies go down 80%. It was such a feat of police work that they made him chief of detectives. When the next guy came in to be commander of the Southwest District, robberies went back up 80%. He's an honest guy. Then they started yelling at him in the ComStat meetings, for losing control of his district. Martin O'Malley made the third grade test scores go up by cheating it and by teaching the test, having the teachers teach the test, as you saw in season 4. That game was completely wiped out in the fifth grade. You saw the Baltimore Sun trumpet the third grade test scores and fail to look with any depth at what No Child Left Behind was doing in the schools. There were a certain number of political prosecutions that were the result of some similar dynamic, not exactly the same, but similar dynamics between the U.S. Attorney and the State's Attorney's Office and the city and feds, as we played in the season. Never ended up in the Baltimore Sun. How is it that a TV show, a television drama, I mean, all you had to do was go to any bar with any cop over the rank of sergeant, at any, and buy him 2 beers, and you were writing on cocktail napkins the shit that they were doing to hide the crime. Because a lot of the cops were disgusted. This is all to get Martin O'Malley elected governor. Never got into the paper. You could go to any school teacher and ask about teaching, you're teaching the test answers? Yeah, as best we can, as fast as we can. Never got in the paper. There were drug wars fought. Guys like Prop Joe were killed. It used to be, sometimes the Sun would miss him, sometimes they would find him. They were you'd never even see it in the briefs column. I'd hear about it from, a guy would call me from prison, a guy that I know, would call me and say, collect call, did you hear Toke got killed? When? I didn't see it in the paper. It's like, it was in the prison grapevine. They knew about it in Jessup, but the Baltimore Sun didn't know. So that is the meta moment, which is everything that happened in the critique is indicative of how thin that newspaper is now because of what Chicago and out-of-town ownership did. And we put it in a television show, or at least we put a facsimile of it in a television show. Now, admittedly, we don't have the same rigor of reporting, we can run a mile on a rumor, but, the truth is it was all true. And if you watch The Wire, you got a hint at it. But you should never have to watch a television drama to get a hint at what, there's something absurd about that, but that was the twist of that. So.
David, would you like to take maybe one more question?
I feel like if they're standing, let's just, I'll go faster.
You just answered my question, so thank you for the Wire.
Hi. Killed you, huh? Had just about enough.
I was wondering, I read your Esquire article on impact journalism. It was Esquire.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, on impact journalism, right? I've been thinking a lot about the portrayals of the reformists in The Wire, people who try to reform the system, right? And I'm wondering if you see any connection at all between sort of the idea of impact journalism, right, like covering homeless in the way they do,
right,
and the idea of reform.
No,
reformist politics.
There's no connection.
Okay.
Only the most minor connection, which is if you find somebody who's got his hand in the till and you catch him and you say, gotcha, you've reformed it to the extent that one guy who was stealing or one guy who was a thug or one guy who was an asshole had his hand slapped. Congratulations. Let me tell you what impact journalism was in Baltimore. And this was the gospel according to John Carroll and Bill Marimo, And it's what they learned in Philly. It's what Gene Roberts perfected. It's what Carol brought here to the LA Times, and and it will not fail to win a Pulitzer every now and then, and certainly with more frequency than not doing it. It certainly will be rewarded. But I'll give you two examples of the inherent dishonesty in narrowing your focus. I was on the street reporting the corner when welfare reform came in under Clinton. It was really dramatic. Everything was being tossed this way and that. State social workers are trying to figure out what the hell's going on. This program is no longer funded. This loan program is in its place, but we only have this. It was crazy. And the Baltimore Sun assigned reporters to look at the SSI program, which is Social Security Disability, just to look at that and to report about how there were lots of guys getting SSI checks who weren't really disabled. There was fraud. God damn it, there was fraud. And we got guys who were walking around on two good legs and they got an SSI check. Meanwhile, up at Rosemont, at the Social Security office, state social workers are making every one of their clients fill out SSI applications and saying, you're going to get turned down once, twice. It was the only program still standing for a certain category of adult males. So the state people, having everything defunded in this reform, we're hurling people into SSI as a tactic. Utterly, did the Baltimore Sun ever go and look at what happened with welfare reform on the streets of its city? No, they did the gotcha about the guys in SSI. And now, here's the pontification according to a guy like Carroll, which is, well, there's nothing to say a newspaper can't do both. You can look at the big and you can look at, you do this, except they never did the one. They just did the one that could win them a prize. Second story. They had the guy who was making stuff up at the Baltimore Sun, one of his big projects was lead paint poisoning. He did a ton of articles on lead paint poisoning, January to December only because, keep it in that calendar year for the Pulitzer. And he was passionate about lead paint poisoning. And it got to the point where he actually started making the argument based on some real spurious logic that the reason for the city violence, the reason for the level of violence in the inner city was that the kids perpetrating it were all lead paint poisoned. That lead paint, if you could stop lead paint poisoning, you could, this whole drug violence thing would go away because the kids would not be, functionally lead paint poisoned. And this bordered, if it didn't cross the line to actual racism, it certainly bordered on it. To ignore the fact that these kids are product of a disaster of the school system, of broken homes, of environments where the only viable economic engine was the drug trade. To overlook all of that, to overlook the entire schematic of their lives and focus on this one thing. First of all, of course, more of the kids who are involved in the drug violence in the inner city are lead paint poisoned or have residue of lead in their bodies. Where else is there lead paint? Where else are, it's like, that defines that notion of, God damn it, if I'm myopic enough, if I exclude everything, if I hammer the shit out of this, if I keep writing stories so that the governor will schedule some hearings, and then I can say the governor scheduled some, and maybe if they pass a law, and I can send, I'm just a bad law away from the public service Pulitzer. And that was the journalism of John Carroll and Beryl Marimo. And I don't doubt that they, I haven't looked at what John did here at the LA Times. I'm sure there's some good journalism in there. I'm sure there are a lot of people who think he's a wonderful man. I'm sure, he certainly looks the part. But I watched it close up. I'm sorry, I watched it close up and it was inherently dishonest. And it was wearying because the world is more complex than that. And, to dismiss these profound forces that are at work on the Dukies and the Randys and everybody else of the world as being, well, if they just kept the lead paint out of their blood, they'd be fine. They'd all be, fucking pre-law. I mean, it was incredible. It was, yeah. Oh, and by the way, the fabulist at the Baltimore Sun, the guy doing lead paint poisonings, there were several stories that were retracted in full. Retracted, I don't mean corrections, I mean the premise of the stories were retracted. But the one where I finally decided I'm never going to not use their name in public, that I'm always going to speak to this publicly. I'm going to own my past as a guy who loved the Sun, who worked there, and was just sick to death at what became of the place, was the moment in 2000, in the height of this campaign to, ride the lead paint poisoning thing to glory, that the reporter declared, in that way that you cover your coverage, that your coverage of your coverage is as important as anything, that the governor of Maryland, Paris Glendening, was coming to Baltimore to meet with the black ministers to talk about this, the Sun's powerful lead paint poisoning coverage, and to address them and to try to find ways to resolve this long-standing nightmare. And it even quoted the Reverend Douglas Miles as saying that he told the governor, he told him about his own, I think it was niece or cousin, who was lead paint poisoned. Except the governor didn't. He came to Baltimore to discuss crime. And lead paint poisoning never came up. And Doug Miles never had a conversation about his niece or about anything else involving lead paint poisoning. And when this was brought to John Carroll's attention, his response was, it was an honest mistake. It was in his notepad. At that point, I just, I remember talking to him on the phone and saying, John, well, I mean, you read the story in Esquire. Why am I telling it again? But it was that moment of, and so it was linked to that impact journalism. It was linked to the very impulse, Guys like that would rather care about how many lines, when they walk into a room, somebody says, this is the guy that won, 12 Pulitzers in however many years at whatever paper he was at. Whether or not his paper actually covered his city, and whether or not readers actually knew their city better, that's the mission of a newspaper. Comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable. These were guys who would rather have a nonprofit beat than a poverty beat. If that's not comforting the comforted and afflicting the afflicted, I don't know what it is. So, I mean, yeah, I got nothing on impact journalism.
I've heard that we need to be out of the room. However, we can continue. We have a reception if you can stay a little bit. I want to thank...
Is there a bar?
Yes, there's a bar. There's a bar. We're journalists. There's a bar. The lawyers can join us. I want to thank Marie Cleves and Lisa Baker and Giovanna Carrera.
You'll get me later if you can. I mean, over a drink.
And I especially want to thank Kareem Clayton for helping us put this together.
Okay, thank you.